Started with this show, I'd just like to remind you, like so many YouTube content producers, that to help this program to stay popular, you need to both like, subscribe by clicking the subscribe button and ringing the notifications bell so that you are warned in advance whenever Inde-Car is going to go live. Now, doing just those simple things before you start watching the show will make sure that more and more people get to see the program. Anyway, having said that, what's been happening? Well, a number of things have been happening, but I think one of the most visible things that's about to happen, particularly in Glasgow, where I live, is on Saturday. It's the 12th of July. Now, that is a notorious or famous date, depending on who you are and where you live, for Ulster Unionism, for people who celebrate the Battle of the Boyne and the establishment of the 6 counties of Northern Ireland as a British protectorate. I would say at this stage, it's a bit of history that you could certainly commemorate. But the idea of commemorating this seems to fall into one single category, and that is orange marches or orange walks. Now, it seems like the marching season this year has gone on forever. There have been numerous orange marches and lodge events and rallies and marching bands over the last days and weeks in the run-up to the 12th. But Saturday is really the big day. It's the day when the city of Glasgow streets empty of normal human beings completely, who don't want to witness the spectacle of a sectarian march through their cities. And of course it happens not only here in Glasgow, but also in other towns and cities across central Scotland. Now, at the same time as saying, freedom of speech is a great thing, you should be free to demonstrate whatever you like. That, I think, is accepted by all of us as a reasonable freedom that everyone should have. The freedom of expression, the right to protest, the right to celebrate, all of these things are basic human rights. And yet, certain things are deemed to be unacceptable. For example, if you were to have a march in support of Palestine at the moment, you would probably either be arrested or your event would be banned because of pronouncements made by London, which have criminalised one organisation already, which existed primarily just to support Palestinians, and yet they're labelled as terrorists. Now, if you compare and contrast that to the Orange Order, the Orange Order exists mostly in West Central Scotland, where there is still a memory, if you like, of what happened in Northern Ireland all those hundreds of years ago, when the people of the south of Ireland were trying to liberate their country from British rule. And that independence war led eventually to the partition of Ireland, I think it was 1922, into the north and the south, the Republic of Ireland as we know it, and the northern 6 counties, which became known as Northern Ireland. Now, whilst that's a historical fact and it's worth noting it, or even commemorating the fact that it happened, the Orange Lodge doesn't really do that. They dress up in bizarre outfits, often wearing business suits and bowler hats and carrying black umbrellas as if they were pantomiming some kind of London businessman, and wearing the orange sash, which they believe represents Orangeism. Now, William of Orange, who was a Catholic king, incidentally, is celebrated as being the man who ushered in Protestantism to the northern part of Ireland and made it British. Now, the events of the Battle of the Boyne actually bear that out, that the British ended up keeping those. William of Orange became the king of the United Kingdom, which at that point was Great Britain, basically just Scotland and England, a bit of Wales as well. So Northern Ireland got added to the retinue of conquered nearby countries. However, the people who go on these marches are really there to demonstrate what they call their culture. But their culture consists of singing songs in which they joyously proclaim their hatred of all Catholics, of all nationalists, all people who don't support Britain, basically. And this is basically a hate festival. It's a demonstration of hatred. It is also, I suspect, an insertion of a a British construct, a wedge to drive between the people who live here, dividing them between those who are Protestant, in other words, Church of Scotland or whatever, and those who are not. That could be everybody, including Catholics, Muslims, atheists like myself, and anybody else who doesn't really believe in what they say. And so most people, most rational people in Scotland, when these things happen, disappear. They don't want to stand around and watch these idiots parading through the streets, banging drums and dancing around in the Gallus fashion, because it's foreign to us. It's not something we celebrate, and it's not something we recognise as a cause for celebration. The implicit racism and sectarian hatred imbued in these marches is an ugly stain that nobody in Scotland would like to celebrate. And so the vast majority of people, and I think a recent poll I saw said that 87% of people disapproved of holding any kind of orange marches, that there's a strong groundswell against this. And yet it still continues. Which begs the question, who is it who is enabling these marches to take place? It has to be the local councils. Now, in a local council or local authorities, but as big as they were in Glasgow, there's usually one person who is in charge of the parades committee. And this is the part of the council which says yes or no to applications for parades, for street closures, for all sorts of inconvenience to be visited on everybody who's in Glasgow at the time, including tourists, people who work there, people who are trying to get in and out to do their shopping. All of those things not only disrupted, but almost completely prevented by these massive events. The question is, who is it who's enabling these marches to go ahead, and why? Is it the case that in amongst these many councillors who are elected in these rather badly, the franchise for elections for councils usually very big, but the turnout's normally pathetically low. Nobody really cares who they are, but nobody seems to ask the question, are any of these people that we're about to choose, are any of them connected to the Orange Order, for example, or any other organisation which promotes hatred? And if they do, then we should know about it before we vote them into office, because once they're there, they enable things like this to happen. They're not casting aspersions. I don't know who is in charge at the moment in Glasgow for allowing parades to happen. But not only does the Orange Order get the right to parade and have the entire city shut down just so that they can do it, they import thousands of other Orange Lodge members from all over the United Kingdom, and more particularly from Ireland, from Northern Ireland. So I guess there may be tens of thousands of Orange men and women marching through the streets on Saturday, many of whom are not local, many of whom are not connected to Scotland in any way, but are there to swell the numbers. And I believe this is a political tool wielded by the United Kingdom to keep us in our place. Basically, it's a slap in the face. We're in charge. These bully boys, these big guys who are marching through the streets, shouting hatred and singing hatred songs, they're there to frighten the willies out of you. And you have to just accept that. We're in charge, and these guys are going to tell you that. That's what the message is when you see an Orange Lodge march like that. There are many Orange Lodges all around Glasgow, and I just drove through a single street, just one little street where there's an Orange Lodge, and there I saw Union flags hanging all over the place, Union Jack bunting, and more worryingly, the Red Hand of Ulster flag. This is a flag which is essentially an English flag, basically a red cross on a white rectangle. And in the middle of that red cross there's this red hand. And this symbolises British control over the northern 6 counties of Ireland, this so-called red hand. It also was associated in the 70s with anti-republican terrorist groups, such as the UDA. It no longer is, as far as I know, but displaying a sectarian flag like that ought to be banned, even if the Union flag is flying. I mean, we can all accept the Union flag is something we don't like, but it doesn't hold the same, shall we say, unpleasant history, not as unpleasant as the Red Hand flag does. And at the same time, all of these things are provocations. These are there to put us in our place, to scare us, make us think these guys are in charge, even though they're only a tiny cabal in a tiny building in a little side street off the main part of the city. And they only exist there, and there's probably not that many of them. But they're there, right? And they hold these opinions. They have a right to express those opinions. But closing an entire city and importing tens of thousands of other orange people from all over the world in order to swell the ranks and close off an entire city is almost like an invasion plan. Anyway, those are my opinions on what's happening on the 12th. Now, the other question that this poses is, why do the police go along with this? Surely the police must be absolutely frightened that this kind of hatred festivity is going to get out of hand, that there will be violence, there's going to be drunkenness. These are all the hallmarks of these sectarian marches. Many of the people associated with them get drunk, they shout hatred, they spit at people, they call them names, they sing songs about how they want to murder them all, and they get away with it. And the police are basically there just to prevent things from getting too ugly. But who controls the police? Who exactly are the Scottish police actually accountable to? The story goes that they're accountable to the Holyrood Parliament. Now, that is a bit of an elastic statement. Being accountable to the Parliament does not mean that they're directed by that Parliament or by the Scottish Government. And in fact, you'll notice that when you look at the times when they have changed the Chief Constable, the head of the Police Scotland organisation, it's almost always another police officer, senior officer, from somewhere in England, Northern Ireland, but mostly England and Northern Ireland, who's imported into Scotland to lead the Scottish Police Service. And that person is placed there for a reason. Very few times have I ever seen an actual Scot in that job. Once or twice, to be fair. There have been one or two, but the vast bulk of them are imported from south of the border. Why is that? Well, I think you can tell why that is, because somebody in Westminster wants to keep tabs on what the Scottish police are doing and to make sure that they don't interfere unduly in these orange marches. That they don't say, no, it's going to cause too much trouble, we are not going to police it, you'll have to cancel it. That doesn't happen. It happens with other marches, but it never happens with an orange march. They get carte blanche to do what they want. They even get government assistance grants to stage these events, not from the Scottish Parliament incidentally, but from the rest of the UK. So this is state-sponsored demonstrations of hatred, racism and sectarianism, bought and paid for by the British state, and policed by a police service which is led by somebody from somewhere else. I think you can see how this is all adding up. So really this is the bad news for Scotland this coming weekend. And if you have any plans for the weekend, make sure you get out of town and get as far away from the sectarianism as possible. If you own a local business that's along one of the marching routes, close it and pull the shutters down. Don't participate. Don't leave your shop open and prone to damage or vandalism, because this is exactly what these events tend to attract. It's a sad fact that there's a retinue of people who follow these events, maybe not the participants, but there are some people who are there to cause trouble, and they do so. Anyway, that's the bad news. What's the good news? Well, there is some good news, and this never made the papers, like so many things that are good news for Scotland. You may remember me talking a while ago about tidal energy and how it's actually the future of renewable energy in Scotland. Well, that claim that I made has got a huge boost in the last 2 days when Maygen, one of the big tidal energy companies operating in Scotland, announced that their tidal energy machines, their turbines, which I believe, I seem to remember that they were in the northern channel, somewhere off the north coast of Scotland. But anyway, I digress. Those machines have been under the sea, producing power continuously without any maintenance whatsoever for 6 whole years, way past what the engineers expected them to manage. Now this proves that the technology involved, the machining, the tooling, the materials that they use to design and build these enormously powerful energy harvesters are definitely up to the task. The fact that they have lasted 6 years submerged in salt water, which is flowing past them all the time, it's polluted with sand and particles, there are all sorts of things which could have caused them to fail. They didn't, which proves that the technology has matured to the point where it can be installed anywhere and everywhere where there are good tidal streams and there's a point where they can connect to the grid. Now, why is this good news? Well, for those of you who've listened to my program and also to Hodma Jacob with Norrie Hunter, you know that many people, particularly in rural Scotland and in the Highlands, are sick of seeing massive new wind turbine farms being erected all over the beautiful landscape, and it is a blot on the landscape in some places. The justification for this comes from the British state, really, that they need the energy. They need that energy to feed to the south. Scotland has more than enough renewables to last itself 7 times over, so the rest of it is heading to England. However, let's take a step back from that for a moment and imagine that Scotland has finally broken its ties with the Union and is now an independent country. Those wind turbines, if we start to install tidal energy turbines instead, each tidal energy turbine will technically produce 816 times more power than the wind turbine of the same diameter, because of the fact that water is much thicker and heavier and it has more power in it, whereas wind is much more vague, it's much more turbulent, and it's far more unpredictable. Tidal energy runs 4 times a day every time the tide moves, and it is entirely predictable. And if you have arrays of machines, and the 6 machines that were looked at in this recent report were producing enough power, I think, for at least 7,000 homes, just from these 6 machines. You don't need that many more. In fact, if you scale these machines up a bit, you get that to 70,000 homes. Now, there are a certain number of homes in Scotland that could be powered by tidal energy, and because it comes at regular times of the day, you can use pumped storage reservoirs, in other words, hydroelectric schemes, to store that power when the tidal turbines are idle, when the tide is slack, and before it starts to change direction. So you have a system which can be managed really easily, it's predictable, and all of the land-based wind turbines could effectively be taken away, not necessarily scrapped because they might be perfectly working, and actually export them to England and let them put them up on their land. Because A, they don't have the same tidal resource we do, but many of the flatter areas, particularly in southeast England, have good winds coming off the North Sea. They could probably use them. And that would take the load off our energy grid and place it onto theirs. But those turbines would have a future. It just wouldn't be on our nice hillsides. So I see this as a turning point for Scottish tidal energy. Years ago, about 1976, I wrote a paper on combined tidal turbine arrays and pumped storage systems. And I saw the future for it way back then, that we had so much energy that we could tap if only we had computers to control it, and we had the investment in the turbine technology and the grid to support it. That already exists, and now it should develop much more fully. So I hope that this sudden realization amongst investors that tidal turbines do not require constant maintenance over years, and they can be left in the sea for anything up to 6 years, according to this. That's remarkable, because even a wind turbine operating for 6 years needs regular maintenance. The fact that these don't is incredible, but it just goes to show you, if those machines were manufactured here in Scotland in some of our redundant shipyards and engineering plants, our jobs would be created here and those machines would be serving the public here. So the future for tidal energy is terrific, and this is something which, once we are independent, I would campaign to have done straight away. It's not something I would wait around for, and it would certainly help the people who live in the Highlands and the mountains, whose tourism industry is suffering because of the preponderance of unnecessary onshore wind turbines. There's enough capacity offshore, easily, or there will be, to cover whatever is lost when these land-based turbines are taken away from these beauty spots, these Highland mountains and glens, which is where they currently are. So that's it from Inde-Car today. I hope you've enjoyed the topics today, the idea of having to put up with British sectarianism forced on us every year, but also the optimistic outlook for Scotland as an independent state because of the work of Scottish tidal energy generators and the engineers who created those. That's it from me today. I'll see you again tomorrow at 9:30 when Inori and I will be back with our usual edition of Hod na Jacob. So I look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, as I always say, keep the faith. It's not over till it's over. Bye now.